Nick Wolny, welcome to So Money.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. And congratulations, you're back on the show, this time as a newly published author. Your book is called Money Proud: The Queer Guide to Generate Wealth, Slay Debt, and Build Good Habits to Secure Your Future. Congratulations, Nick.
Thank you so much. It feels so weird to introduce myself as author. I don't know. You
Really?
see like stars in people's eyes. Yeah. Because when you say writer, they're like, that's cute. But then when you say author, I don't know, just like a few different letters and they're like, ooh la la. So
Really?
getting used to the excitement of it all.
Well, get used to it. Get used to it. Let's talk about your personal journey in personal finance. I read the introduction to your book. I'm still reading through the pages. It's very well written. I love that you have decided to really focus on the queer community. I think it's a very underserved market that has very unique needs when it comes to personal finance. And your journey has been, you call it a spiritual journey as an LGBTQ plus person. Can you tell us what that means to you? Tell us about that framing. And you're very clear in the book that you want it to not veer into this sense of toxic positivity or this idea of like throwaway advice. Cause like this idea of spiritual journey, it can be kind of like an eye roll moment for some people to hear that phrase. So tell us what you actually mean by that.
Yeah. I think it really came down to how it feels to take a close look at your own behavior and what you're doing in your day-to-day life and how that ends up creating the life that you have. Things like thought patterns. I also think, family conditioning, social conditioning, things like that. I am not a religious person, to be clear. And I'm also pretty blunt in the introduction that religious persecution leads to a lot of the terrorism against queer people all over the world. Right. So I'm at first, I'm hesitant to even throw out the word spiritual. But when it comes to connecting how you're spending your money and how you're thinking about money and your behavior and just connecting that to the other areas of your life and how it all fits together, being able to pursue what you want and being able to cultivate the life that you want. And I think learn a lot about yourself, which is
Mm.
something that queer people in particular must actively navigate. The connection between that, the connection between money and mental health was really interesting for me. I've been doing a variety of odd jobs. I joke in the introduction that I'm not like other money authors who kind of got it all right, checked every box, and now they're a super expert. I've pretty much effed up, every step of the way, and became self-employed in 2016, and every mistake you can make in the book, and I've made that and all of that. I did that full time for almost 6 years, and I just kind of felt like I had plateaued as a writer and as a marketer and as a creator. And so I went into corporate media. A mutual friend of ours, Adam Ariema, reached out to me about a brand called Next Advisor, a personal finance brand. And he's like, we really want an editor who can do, small business entrepreneurship, fire culture, creator economy, side hustles, that kind of stuff. All the stuff that's about making more money,
Hmm.
and we've seen you write and, what do you think? You want to come do this dance? And so I came on, and can we swear on this podcast?
Yes. It's explicit.
Okay. I was getting my ass kicked, Farnish. At the beginning, I was getting my
Really a
ass
curse
kicked.
word.
Yeah.
Let's
Well, I'm just making sure.
kid.
I'm just making sure.
Okay.
I don't want to mess up the
My
ratings
mojo?
on
You're
the
good. You're good. You're good.
distribution. Yeah. But I was getting my ass kicked because there's just a lot of nuts and bolts of finance, a lot of regulation and things like that. And also just looking at the other verticals and what the evergreen coverage is in personal finance, banking, credit cards, loans, all that stuff. And the reason that that is evergreen is that people are constantly seeking help with that stuff.
Yeah.
They're constantly seeking help with that stuff, just seeking that information. Around the same time, I started writing a finance column for Out magazine. It was a very Los Angeles origin story. I met the editor-in-chief at a party, and we got a little drunk, and I don't remember who pitched who, but we were
As
like,
one does.
we should definitely do a finance column in this entertainment magazine. So I joke that I'm usually sandwiched between two man spreads. There's my little finance column. They'd be like, inflation. But we're going on 4 years. It gets a really good response. So in that experience, learning a lot about how to package the service journalism of personal finance
Hmm.
for a queer audience.
Yeah.
What is going to resonate with LGBTQ people and even within our little subsets, but what resonates? And much of it goes back to those behavioral finance pieces, how we think about money, how we feel about money,
Mm,
how we numb, how we avoid. A
mhm,
lot of that is actually what's shaping our behavior and even just kind of the cultures that we identify with. So discovering all of that and being like, okay, this is not just about the dissemination of information. This book can also be a really great packaging opportunity,
mhm,
present this information that we know is evergreen for people and to really style it to appeal to that queer person or
mhm.
ally who is afraid to look at their bank account because they know how much damage they've been doing the last few
Yeah.
weeks. That's who it appeals to.
You describe one of the stressors in the lives of LGBTQ plus individuals, this minority stress, as one of the differentiators when you're talking about what makes it different for this community when it comes to personal finance. What you ask the question, what does money have to do with this community? Like, why are we differentiating it here? And you bring up a few things. And one of them is this idea of minority stress. Can you drill this down for us? I want to unpack this and get our audience to really understand like what is involved. What are the stressors?
Yeah. Minority stress, it's an APA term, American Psychological Association. It's the stress that is experienced from being the minority in a group, which probably a lot of people can relate to in one form or another, right? It doesn't just apply to queer people, it can apply to anyone who is a minority in the social environment they are in day to day.
Mhm.
And so it's certainly a chronic stressor. It's something that typically you're going to be encountering on a regular basis. And so what we know about chronic stress is that chronic stress actually begins to alter the brain over time. Our brains are, we have the plasticity in our brains even as adults. And so if we're in an environment where we're chronically stressed, some of the ways that it makes us cope or makes us shut down, things like that, that is going to have a downstream impact on how we're managing our money. You're not thinking very much about investing when you
Yeah.
are too focused on survival.
And it's passed
Uh,
down from the generations, right? Because of trauma, because of microaggressions, macroaggressions. Like that's kind of what I was wondering is like, what are the experiences, right, that lead to the stress, the current experiences, the past experience. I guess that's what I.
yeah, I think it also is, so it can be inherited,
Mhm.
but I think also a good example. So a good data set we have is the data that comes out from the Trevor Project, which I just drop a couple of items from it in that introduction. But about 40% of LGBTQ adults experienced a mental health illness in 2024, and that's compared to 18% of all adults. And then we also see a lot of just outperforming of queer teens reporting depression, anxiety at
Mhm.
much, much higher levels than teenagers in general. So it's this combination of, you can be stressed that they've inherited, but it can also just be them getting on social media and looking at all the headlines every day, very adamantly focused on the erasure of trans people and, what's going
Mhm.
to happen with same sex marriage.
Right.
And, just one thing after another, after another, after another, after another. And if you haven't had that lived experience, like some of us elder adults have, then, it can be really scary. It can be like, wow, this place is not for me. And so that begins to, what I assert in the book is that it creates this downstream desire to seek out relief
Yeah.
in whatever way you can. And that sometimes finances will go to the wayside in
Mhm.
order to seek that out.
Mhm.
One example is that queer people are more likely to live in a city, right? Because they want to find that community of other people who are like them. They can feel that sense of belonging. It's more expensive to live in a city, you
Mhm.
know, and so that's one example. Another example is that, for young queer people who go to college, one of the reasons they go to college is to get away from home, is to
Yeah.
get away from their family. And that occurs at a much higher percentage rate. That's from Williams Institute data. It's a much higher reason for them choosing the out of state school that might be
Right.
like an eye-watering tuition, things
A
like
catch
that, is because
22 almost, right?
yeah, yeah. So there are these kind of different outcomes in which the pursuit of, euphoria and the pursuit of queer joy. And there are some other vices and things that kind of appear in the picture too, right? Like queer people in substance use, queer people and, the other aspects and whatnot, where again, the escaping from that minority stress and the desire to move toward a more stable environment or a more welcoming environment often makes queer people choose to do things with their money
Yeah.
in pursuit of that at the cost of other
Yeah.
aspects of financial wellness.
And so, all the more reason to learn how to manage your money well, how to earn more. How did you ultimately get a handle on your money, Nick? I mean, it sounds like a lot of this is mindset work. A lot of this is kind of maybe it's financial therapy work, but then there are systems that you have to put in place, right? And so, what is maybe the first step, whether it's this first step that you took or it's a first step in your book?
So the first step I took was just allowing myself to slow down
Hmm.
enough to look at my money. One bad habit, I'm probably going to get canceled for saying this, but one bad habit I had developed as an online business person is taking this language of, invest in yourself or, or trust the process, these aphorisms that kind of float around in that online entrepreneur space and spending money that I didn't have, for, oh, I'm investing in the business. I'm investing in the business, Farnoosh. That's why I'm doing this mastermind. I'm investing in the business. And sometimes the investment would be realized, and then sometimes it wouldn't. But I was just skipping over that step of, of do I have the money?
Yeah.
And then to be fully immersed in personal finance journalism and personal finance media, where it's just a very different mentality. It's, just actually looking at what you're doing and then making decisions based off of that and kind of weighing your options. I also think, I was covering fire culture, and
Hmm.
fire culture is unique on the opposite end of the spectrum of financial independence, retire early. That's
Right.
fire, where these people are saving 50, 60, 70, 90% of their incomes in order to retire very early. And then they retire and they have no idea what to do with themselves because they were such an asshole the entire time they were saving so aggressively that they never bothered to learn anything about themselves. And then they wasted a lot of their most able-bodied years or healthful years along the way, or their spouses left them, or they never hung out with their kids because they were, they're just, it's not always about the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And so I think what I took away from all of that was just kind of this balance of, all right, like being diligent and being grounded, and making a plan for things like saving rate. So the end of part one of the book, we really arrive after we've kind of talked about you and your thoughts and your feelings and also your debts and all that stuff. And just really the first sentence of the whole book is it's time to come out to yourself about your money.
Yeah.
So after you've done that, arriving at that point of saving rate, because to me, saving rate, how much you have left over at the end of each month is sort of that informs everything else that we're going to potentially do.
Hmm.
And saving rate, Federal Reserve of St. Louis has measured that, it's between 3 and 5% for most Americans, which is not amazing. It was in double digits back in the 1980s. So looking at that, I also think that helps make the book more universal for people. If someone's reading and their salary is $40,000, that's a different situation than someone whose salary is $140,000. So saving rate can kind of help you determine what's left over. And we need that because that's the stuff that's literally the dollars and cents that we're going to be working with
Hmm.
to do all the other stuff for the rest of the book. So once I got clear on that, it's like, okay, what am I working with? What do I actually have to work with? And then making decisions about what to do with that money, sort of sequential step. It kind of helped me not worry about some of the more intermediate things that I think are distracting for most people,
Hmm.
cryptocurrency and options
Oh
and
my gosh.
stuff that's just, you need money in the picture to
Hmm.
even play in those sandboxes to begin with, and people are skipping that step. So let's focus on that first step before you do other stuff.
I'm curious if it ever felt isolating to you as you were trying to kind of rein things in financially. As you described, the queer culture, it's very, for you at least, it was very social, parties, DJs. I mean, the book talks about that at least in your 20s. It was very much like, joyous, and there was a community and there was going out and there was, late nights and so, and I've talked to others who are the personal finance experts who are in the LGBTQ plus community, and they've echoed this aspect of the challenge being like the consumerism and and the spending and the debt that can happen as a result of this. When you're that person who's like in a friend group that's like, I'm not going to go out this weekend. I am not spending money on this vacation that we always take during spring break, or we're not skiing. We're skiing always on the holidays. I'm not doing that. I wonder how to manage that, how to work through that, how to communicate this to your friends. TikTok tells us to loud budget. I love that, but maybe it's easier for some than others.
Yeah, I really like the loud budgeting trend because I think it gets people in communication and just to get them to set boundaries rather than get swirled up in the consumerism of it all. Like you said, I think what makes queer people susceptible is that desire for belonging
Yeah.
within the community. And I talk about how it's kind of twofold. There's this initial phase of like trying to find your community and perhaps having to relocate or just, seek out that community. And then you find the community, and then the community is inviting you to Mykonos again this summer. And you're like, oh God, like I'm a waiter. And so
I'll be
then
your
you actually have
proxy.
this
Don't worry. I'll go.
so you actually have this second phase after you've sort of discovered your community and you feel that sense of belonging where you want to make sure you're keeping up with them so that they don't leave you behind or so that you don't lose this thing that you so desperately yearned for. And I don't know that that is unique to queer people. I think that's true for a lot of different groups of people. But certainly we see it in queer culture, really like an iteration of keeping up with the Joneses,
Yeah.
in some way, but it was like the friendship version of that. So I like the loud budgeting piece. This is mean, but maybe you might need different
We've
friends.
already been canceled at least
You might
once
need
during
different
this
friends.
podcast,
I
so
know.
you can
Actually, my
just
goal is
be
to get
mean at this
canceled by the end of the
point.
podcast.
It's
Yeah.
fine. I love
Maybe
how in the book you talk about that you say you feel a duty to live a joyous career in life because many LGBTQ plus people before you never got the chance. I think, I often say that you have to give your money meaning. You have to give your money meaning. You have to wrap your financial life around a philosophy or five philosophies, right? You got to anchor it in something meaningful to remind you why you're doing the things that you're doing with your money. And for you to say that I'm doing this because I'm doing, I'm spending my money, I'm saving my money because I want to live a joyful life, not just for me, but because I want to honor, right? This community, and also in honor of everybody who helped me get to this place where I can now be in a celebratory place. So, you know, what do you mean when you say managing your money though as part of celebrating being gay? Like what do you want that to represent for people? Tell us.
it's a both and
Mhm.
solution. I'm really passionate about that outcome. I've seen the spend everything approach. I've lived the spend everything approach. And then professionally, I reported on the save everything approach, literally, when reporting on fire and overseeing the coverage of fire and how we were approaching all of that. I think queer people need to find that happy medium, particularly our current legacy of isolation and loneliness and how that has been for so much of our history. It really has to be this both and solution in which we're getting out there and discovering what we like in life so that we can experience more of that when we age and when we, perhaps get to retirement or partial retirement or whatever that looks like, that we actually have a
Mhm.
sense of who we are. And as we know, people will do something like that. They'll, seek out who they are, and it'll actually completely change the direction of their lives entirely as a result. Right. It's like, so
Mhm.
it's this peeling away of the layers and really discovering who you are. And I acknowledge it often costs money to do that.
Mhm.
So, the sinking funds are right up there. They are jammed right in there in that spending and saving plan so that you can be doing both concurrently. And I just think that not even it's really important that we figure out what we enjoy in life in person, not just on our little computers that are in our hands, scroll 7, 8, 9 hours a day. And, that's so much of our lives. We got to figure out what we like doing. We got to figure out where we like to travel to and what cultures we like to experience and what kind of
Mhm.
food we like to eat and, and creating different groups of friends and, and all of that and just and cultivating all of that. So I think that there is a more holistic definition of wealth to be had. I'm sure I am not the first person on this podcast to say something like that. But but
Begs to
like it
be
is
repeated.
true.
It begs to be
Yeah.
repeated.
Yeah.
You brought up retirement, Nick, too, and I think, if we could just explore that as well. Because also you said something in the book that was really heartbreaking to me when I read it, and I think you're over it now. I know you're over it now, but you said that, again, I'm gonna go back to retirement in a second, but I know I'm, like, waffling here a bit, like, but you said there was a moment where you didn't think you were going to get to, like, an old age, and that's why partly you didn't care about managing your money well,
Mm.
and that was sad to me. I know we can unpack that a little bit, but I think that's a lot of people probably of your generation who grew up queer, identifying as queer because yeah, I mean, AIDS was a real thing, back then, staring them down. So now hopefully we are living in an era where we do see us aging gracefully and into, our 90s and beyond. And retirement costs money. It's very
Yep.
expensive.
Yep. It is.
The good news is we're living longer. The bad news is we're living longer and it costs money. And you write that we need a reframe with retirement, that it is not determined by age, it is determined by assets. And you've covered the fire movement, as you said, for years. So tell us how we should be rethinking retirement, because you say a lot of people wrongfully are thinking that government is going to save the day, and that these fire people, they're beyond. Like, we could never be these people who, like, retire early, but you say they're just like us. They go harder, Like, it's a choice. It's a choice.
Yeah. I think I say in the book, they're the extra, extra, extra credit people,
Yeah.
right? They're just they're gonna go real hard, and they're thrilled to do it. The For me, specifically to the old age thing, um,
Mm.
because so many gay men died in their 20s and 30s during the AIDS crisis, and the government did nothing for
Yeah.
years, knew it was happening and did nothing. So I will not dilute my disdain for the government. So perhaps that's one reason I'm attracted to fire is just, like Social Security, whatever. That's a different talking point for a different episode. Everyone could go on and on and on about that. I just like the taking the complete personal responsibility of like, okay, what am I going to have to work with as I am getting older, as I am looking at working less, as I am looking at potentially not working anymore. And that's something that the fire people have to figure out, because they will not touch their 401k until 59 and a half. They will not touch Social Security until their 60s. They will not touch Medicare until, they can't until mid 60s. And so they have to come up like part of that fire planning methodology, which this book is essentially delivering, but in like a very gay way, very stylish way. We had a MUA
Listeners,
on
if you could see
staff.
Nick right now, there was a big shoulder action movement. How
Oh, absolutely, yes.
he used his
It's high
shoulders.
tide with these shoulders.
Yeah.
Yes, completely. Yeah, the fire people, the usual, like, okay, you're going to retire in your 60s. The fire people, one of the first steps they have to do is they have to abandon that, because that money is either not going to become available, or they need to do something like, a Roth conversion ladder to get the money out of their 401k to sidestep those penalties, or, just some of the more technical stuff. But they have to problem solve for the fact that they're going to stop working sooner, but they're going to need access to the money that they have saved before our societal, targets and guidelines and things like that. And so in terms of breaking up that perhaps previously held belief that retirement is something you do in your 60s or that you do in your 70s, like helping people understand, there's a set amount of assets, and we teach investing over the course of the book, right? So that people kind of understand, like, oh, this is a thing. This is an asset. Assets make money. Okay,
Mhm.
I could make my money from assets instead of labor, so we go through all of that all throughout the book, but helping people realize that, it's the buildup of those assets that is going to solve the problem down the line when you
Right.
decide that you want to work less, or, if you need to work less, or if you need to stop working. And so if you think about it from that perspective, and just kind of wrap your head around assets, not necessarily as capital because you're a capitalist and you want to be, rich Uncle Moneybags and, take over the whole monopoly board. That's not what we're talking about, but just like an understanding, a working understanding of assets and why you would want them and what they will do for you when you get
And
older.
compounding.
Exactly. And just understanding how all of that stuff works together. Because for many, I feel like it's a sentiment. Maybe it's because I've been on TikTok more lately, but it's just the anti-capitalism is quite passionate right now, and for good reason. We've got this K-shaped economy humming along. It sucks to be on the lower rung of that. But I worry that in the rejection of that, people swing so far in the other direction that they're putting their dollars under the mattress,
Yeah.
and they're missing out on
Not a
some of the
fear.
things that historically help people, make and save enough money to be able to have something like retirement be an option in whatever capacity that looks like.
Well, you spend a lot of time on TikTok. Is there any recommendation that you have?
Unfortunately.
Like, I guess you do it for work, but when you are on TikTok for work and you're perusing for financial information content, what's a healthy way to browse TikTok for money stuff? Just don't go on there is my advice.
Well, I should first say I'm not on there for work, and
Okay.
I
All right.
I don't even know if I'm on there for fun. I know I am on there for fun. Yeah.
All right.
So I've been making vertical videos because I've just acknowledged, I've cried about it on my porch and I've had a martini, and now I'm ready to accept that some people just won't read and they will just never read, and just kind of get over myself that, sharing information in another modality of media,
Mhm.
and another type of content. So I've been doing vertical videos, and my vertical videos they're so long in comparison. They're like 90 to 120 seconds long, which is agony on TikTok, right? So if someone makes it to the end of this video, I've done a damn good job. But all of that aside, I think, the thing about TikTok is that algorithm is so sensitive. It's so much more sensitive than the other platforms. We were just making fun of Instagram before we hit record, or just all these other platforms are based on social graphs. That's how the algorithm is very tethered to who you were already following. And TikTok doesn't give a shit about that. And that's why that's kind of its secret sauce that has all these other American social media companies back on their heels, is that it is a highly behavior-based algorithm.
Mm.
If you watch, like, whether I want to or not, if I've watched some guy take his shirt off over the first 5 seconds of the video just to figure out whatever the hell is going on,
For work.
then that's all I get for work. Okay, that one is for work. Then the next 25 videos I get are of a similar kind of type of content.
Yeah.
And so looking around, digging around, finding certain accounts I like, and looking for stuff where it's either the discourse or the presentation of information it's good quality, and sifting through that, just kind of engagement bait, or when people move the phone around, to try to keep people on the video for a few seconds. I am much more liberal with the mute button and with the block button on TikTok. And it's not because I don't like you. It's just that I know that that type of content is like kind of not what I'm looking for. And this algorithm is just not big enough.
Yeah.
Or my feed is not big enough
Mhm.
to keep everyone else's little engagement bullshit around,
Yep.
right? Like, I want this to be a news source.
You have to work
Um, you
harder to
know,
curate what you need.
I know it's so tough because there's all this bullshit all over that platform, as with
I
all
think it's
platforms.
terrifying, especially if you're a newcomer, because you're getting a lot of weird stuff sent to you. And I mean, weird. You have to be very careful, especially if that's where it gets really scary. If you're like a teenager and, you could be really exposed to some interesting stuff. Moving on, I want to get back to your book. So I wanted to ask you this. Is there a myth about queer money that you want to just squash with your book and maybe your column in Out Magazine, that you feel like there's a misconception people have that's unfair that you really want to address?
Queer people don't make more.
Mm.
They make less. We're not like wealthier as a whole. One is that it's a very wide swath of people. It's hard to even make any blanket statements about queer people. I talk about that with the like the data that we have on the LGBTQ wage gap. It's 90 cents on the dollar, but within that, it varies quite widely between men and women, between white people and people of color, between cis people and trans people and gender nonconforming people. It's a very wide range. The example I use, I was speaking at an ERG last month, an ERG, and the example I used is that I don't know if you remember this, Farnoosh. When the original Queer Eye came out, they were in one episode they were teaching the straight guy how to eat caviar, and I just feel like that it's like, and everyone was like, "This show is trailblazing." We're just like, there is this like stereotype of
Mm.
queer people or of gay men or of lesbians or
They're
whatever.
fancy.
Yeah, that they're affluent, that it is sink and dink households, so single income, no kids, double income, no kids, right? That they're
Mm.
just, that there's all
Why
of
do we
these
think
different like
that? What
assumptions.
like, who sent out that memo?
I think media representation
Mm.
acclimated to that first, right?
Modern Family?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I just think it's, and also, queer people not having kids like as as often, and that we're starting to see that gap close, as same-sex parents become more accepted in society, more normalized, represented. Much of GLAAD's work is on media representation, the media representation advocacy organization. That's in reaction to stuff like the Hays Code. So for a lot of the 20th century, the queer person could only be the villain. And that was actually, there was like, it was called the Hays Code. And so in terms of like the reaction to that, it's how media shapes our perception of queer people. And I think particularly now, just with lots of people having an opinion on trans people, but many of those people having never met a trans person or interacted with a trans person, they're just going off of what XYZ, radio host or television host is saying about them. So I think a lot of this ends up getting shaped by media representation.
Mm.
And that's why it's important to, you know, get that message out there and get that quality information out there and not just have it be the stereotype, because people will comment on my TikTok, things like, I had no idea that it was, that gay men make less, or that queer
Yeah.
people make less, or that, did all this different stuff. So
I'm curious if your work has eclipsed any of the threats to gay marriage in our country and with the financial implications of that.
yeah, it's important to pay very close attention to it. I think it will be, a pretty dramatic setback. And it's also quite clear that that is the intention of Christian nationalism in
Mhm.
this country, is to reverse that decision and to find the right appellate court case, to drive up to the Supreme Court in order to overturn that decision. And obviously that creates a number of different impacts, the way it gets sent down to the states. One topic that comes up often is that from 2013 to 2015, the states were in this very like patchwork situation. It's very similar to abortion right now, where like it varies a lot from state to state and how states were handling that. And sometimes the laws were codified or the laws were not codified. It's just like there's just a lot of different variation going on with that. So looking at that, we can jump up and down about, you know, how much more money comes into the economy as a result of same-sex marriages being
Mhm.
federally legal. But I think even beyond that, it's just the way it opens the door for discrimination on a number of other things. If the marriage is not allowed, and forget the financial benefits, of course, but there are financial benefits there, estate benefits and whatnot that are
Right.
really, really important. But I think even just the more subjective discrimination that would be implied from that will start to have an impact. But certainly the estate stuff, because, Windsor versus United States, that was in 2013. That was an estate planning case between two women. And that really laid groundwork for Obergefell in 2015, which is the federal same-sex marriage rights. Because, in Windsor, basically a widow was, she had to pay hundreds of $1,000s in estate taxes because her marriage was not recognized
Mm.
federally. And so she ended up winning that case in the Supreme Court against the United States. And so there was lots of conversation and lots of decision made about what a state level marriage does and does not mean. So we'll see what ends up unfolding
Mm.
with that. I think in the interim, it's, the message that I've been pushing is, which is also chapter 10 of Money Proud, is getting the estate planning in check.
Yeah.
That changes and suddenly, federal same-sex marriage is overturned and you live in a state that doesn't have those state level same-sex marriage rights, then you need to be really clear about what other things you might need to add, remove, or change to your estate documents to ensure that your spouse is taken care of. That's stuff like healthcare power of attorney and, and things like that, that you have to be super duper diligent about so that you're not in a situation where you can't be with your spouse or, spend time with your spouse because of paperwork, which, we never don't want that anyway. But
It's so important. I mean, I'm so happy you wrote this book, and I can't think of a better person because you've lived this obviously, but as I have your book in my hand right now, and it's just the way you've written it too. I love the organization. There's obviously great storytelling, but it's the sort of book where you can pick up and you can jump to a chapter because that's where you are in your life right now. You want to learn about investing, go to chapter 6. You want to learn about, the estate stuff, that's chapter 10, and you've also included anecdotes from people in real life. You've got action steps. You've got some tea that you spill, which I really like. It's
yes,
very, very approachable. It's very Nick Wolny. And of course, I love the title. Did you already know the title before you knew anything? Because, like, obviously, this title, I mean, could it have been another title? Do you have other titles in mind, or was this the one that you had to go with? It was
the original went the V1 of the book proposal was gay boss.
Gay Boss.
Yeah. But we were like that maybe that, girl boss is perhaps
Well,
waning.
Girl
So
Boss is
we don't know.
controversial now, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that was like a good call out
Also, I feel
on
like that
my
feels
agent's
like a
part.
career book to me, Gay
Right.
Boss, right? It has
Yeah,
like
and we wanted to like broaden it a little bit more. Well, we wanted, money, cash, or dollar in the title. How it
yeah.
is with SEO and with publishers and all that. But beyond that, I think something that emerged in this book, because the FIRE chapter, which is chapter 9, the financial independence chapter, that was originally the sample chapter in the proposal, and that was originally chapter 2. I think this was pegged to be a little bit more of a FIRE book, a little bit more of an
Oh.
intermediate book. And
Mm.
just as we really worked together in the proposal process and we really meditated on, you know, the tens of millions of queer people that live in this country, and what's going to be of service to them, that we really broadened it into more of a behavioral finance book and more
Yeah.
of a, I wouldn't totally call this a 101. It's not what is a credit card,
Mhm.
but, maybe like a 102 or a 103,
Yeah.
maybe honor AP.
It's a yeah, I love
We
that.
like a little caffeine, yeah, in it. And so, but really giving like that A to Z so that the person who feels like they should know more about their money than they do, and maybe they're intimidated. Again, for me, that target reader is someone who's afraid to open their bank account and look at what they've spent the last couple of weeks. You know what I mean? So appealing to that person and delivering that mix of charisma and actual information
Mhm.
and doing it in a sequential way. This is not a collection of articles with no through line like some of these other books floating around. It's sequential. Everything's in sequence. It's cumulative so that you can feel like you have a really good foundation to then go and feel good about what you're doing with your money, how you're saving it, how you're spending it, and whatever that means for you and your unique life.
And as an author, it's good for you too. It sets the foundation for then the other books that then
Mm,
you write, because I do think you can still write that fire book
right.
as sort of the next level, because someone reads this and they're like, "What else you got, Nick?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
I got this.
definitely.
Got this down. How do I retire early now? How do I, buy a house or start how do I get my side hustles going? I don't know.
It was also about how much we had to cut from this book. I have 30,000 words
Oh
of
my
scraps
gosh.
from
That's
this.
a
Yeah.
workbook. That's something else.
It was interesting just that process. I think in that editing process, I loved doing a traditional deal. I loved doing a deal with a big publisher because working with an editor
Yeah.
at a big publishing house, it raised my game so much. And it also, we were in continuous conversation about like, okay, what are we gonna cut? What are we gonna not include? And then, that forced us to make decisions about why we were including what we were including.
Right.
Like, I'm like, I really think we need this chapter on entrepreneurship as just, an introduction to entrepreneurship framed as a way to make more money or a
Yeah.
way to increase income, things like that. And that meant, okay, we're not going to talk about amortization, that could be in a different book or, other things. And so I think that decision-making process and working very rigorously with an editor in publishing, I'm happy I held out for a traditional book deal, advance aside, and all those little bells and whistles. I really enjoyed what I got out of it in terms of craft and in
Mm.
terms of helping discover this very gay, shoulder shimmying voice that I just don't get too throw around in journalism and in reportage as much.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was a pleasure to write, and it was great to do. I'm so happy that we did like a this sort of foundational work for the
Yeah.
first round.
Well, the work shows, and, I'm excited for everyone to see it, and it's gonna hit the bookshelves soon. It's coming out in January?
December 3rd.
Sorry, it's coming out December 30th, right before the new year. Congratulations. The book again is called Money Proud. Nick Wolny, thank you.
Thanks for having me.